I know when it's going to start. Welcome to the Second Line Show. I'm Nola Nash. Let's let the good times roll. Hi, welcome once again to the Second Line Show. I am your host, Nola Nash. We are honoring Jewish authors today, and we have got three wonderful ladies who are here with me today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you here in just a moment. We are broadcasting live in several places on my page, The Right Review, Nola's Second Line, and of course live on YouTube on Nola Nash Entertainment. Feel free on any of those locations or anywhere else that you find us where it has been shared to go ahead and drop your comments and questions into the comment section. We do try to get to some of those during our conversation. However, if we don't get to yours, never fear. We go back and check those comments after the show and help interact with you guys there. If you could, please give StreamYard permission to use your Facebook profile so that we can see who's giving the comment. Otherwise, it just shows up as Facebook user. So if you don't want to give StreamYard permission to access your profile, totally fine. Just go ahead and drop your name in your comment as well so we know who's out there, because we like to see those familiar names popping in to know that we've got friends watching this show. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and let our authors introduce themselves to you, because we've got some fantastic folks here and I can't wait for you to meet these ladies. So we are going to go Brady Bunch style like we always do. And I realized the other day that that totally dated me when I said Brady Bunch style. It's like, now I'm old, just like my students think I am. But we're going to start over here with Meryl. So Meryl, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to the folks. Let them know anything that you want them to know about you. And if you've got some fun, weird facts, go ahead and throw those in as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Nola. I'm thrilled to be here with you and Alison and Sylvie. And weird facts about me. There are many weird facts about me. I have been writing since the third grade, but when I went for a professional career, my first career was as a high school history teacher, and I ultimately became a school administrator, assistant principal in charge of discipline in a middle school, and then ultimately a school district administrator. In between, I took various breaks, and I did writing. I did features. I did a cooking column even for many years called The Kosher Gourmet.
Oh. And
I also have written all through, I've written opinion pieces. So my first published book was a nonfiction book. I co-authored it with my husband and my brother. It was to help us and to help others get beyond their losses. It's called the Living Memories Project, Legacies That Last. And then I did a companion workbook 2 years after that, a journal in 2016. And my debut novel, The Takeaway Men, was published in August 2020.
Now, don't be humble. That your novel, The Takeaway Man, almost immediately won an award. So
yeah, that was great.
Yeah. So that says an awful lot. And we're going to get to writing some of those stories and how all of this comes into your writing in just a little bit. But right now, we're going to go downstairs to Sylvie. So, Sylvie, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to the folks that are watching in Facebook land.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. So yes, I am actually a late bloomer, you could say. You know, I didn't publish or start writing until I was about 79 years old. My field is really healthcare. I'm a nurse, a chiropractor, and an acupuncturist, and I sort of fell into it, but I do feel that writing was in my soul and wanted to come out. It was a passion that I had, but I just never thought I could do it because I was foreign born and I didn't feel comfortable about writing in another language. So I let it go, but it did come out. My first book is called Make It a Habit. And it is a nonfiction. And it really is coming from a place where, from my experience as a healthcare practitioner, because I felt so many of the health issues that people were coming to my office with as a chiropractor and an acupuncturist primarily, were issues that pertained to their poor choices in their living, in not choosing the right habits. So I felt compelled to write about it. And I honestly have to tell you, I started off thinking, well, let me this be like a calling card. People write books so they can get into a library or another venue so that they can, do their presentation, and this gives them an entry. Well, this has not happened to me. It was maybe my intention originally, but you know what? I fell in love with the writing process. And that was it. I mean, I loved everything else I ever did in my life, and I'm thankful that I could do it. But writing has been wonderful. Now, my second book was not all that easy to write. And it's a memoir, and it's called Beyond the Holocaust, an immigrant's search for identity. And it's my story. And to tell you the truth, I really didn't want to go back there. I didn't want to talk about it. I was doing just fine with everything covered up, and I was happy-go-lucky girl. And I had a feeling if I start thinking about it and writing about it, a lot of things are going to come up that may not be things that I'm interested in actually feeling at this time. But, at the insistence of a son of mine who said, Mom, you've got to do it. And then when my granddaughter, Nana, you got to do it, then I listened, So, and so the book is out, and not much of a marketer, not much of a, how do you call it, publicist or something. So the book is doing well, and people are liking it. And it's good to have it out there. And I want to say something about people like Meryl, who wrote a fiction on a similar subject. And I think it's so important because there aren't many Holocaust survivors left, or even people who went through the war. I don't consider myself a Holocaust survivor. I was not in a camp, and I was not hidden. And I was not, I was very lucky to be able to leave Europe in 1940 during the war. But how blessed could that be? But who's going to be writing this after all that generation is gone? And so, I am so delighted to see that authors like you, Meryl, have taken it upon yourself to continue with the message of what that time was all about. If it's fiction, fine, or if it's something that you get from your parents, that's fine too. But I'm wonderful that we can continue that story.
Well, I'm so glad that your granddaughter especially spurred you on to tell your story as someone who wished that they had more time with grandparents who had stories to tell. There's nothing more special than having those stories, especially in your own words. I was able to sit down with my grandfather, who had the wildest stories of his childhood. They were so much fun. And I sat down with him and a tape recorder one day. And I wish that we had lived closer. I would have done it many, many, many more times. And I will cherish that front and back of that cassette tape forever, because it was him telling me stories. I don't know how much of it was actually true. If you ever met my grandfather, that line blurred a lot, but those stories I cherish. And as a grandchild, I can say that I know how much this will mean to your granddaughter, and the fact that you actually sat down and did it, especially at her urging, is going to be a very special legacy for you to leave behind for her someday. And so thank you for putting that down in writing. And of course, Meryl, just like Sylvie said, it takes people continue to tell those stories, and sometimes the fiction is a good way to present those stories to people in a way that makes them maybe more comfortable for people to read, knowing that it's a very painful subject for everyone. I mean, if you have, a heart in you, it will get torn apart reading stories of the Holocaust. And so fiction is a great way to make those accessible. I have a friend named Ellie Midwood, who is another author. And if you want to read great Holocaust stories, pick up one of her books as well, The Violinist of Auschwitz. And I mean, she has some wonderful books. And Ellie she researches the history, and she will find these sort of little stories that are these people that may have been kind of sidelined in history. And then she makes, she weaves the story around them, and it's essentially their story. But it is also bringing in the larger picture, primarily of the Holocaust. She also writes about Weimar Germany in Berlin at that time, and the film industry, which is also very interesting. So it's a fascinating time period for a lot of us who look back on it and wish that we knew more about what was going on. And so the fictional stories make those things come to life for us. We've all seen it in a textbook, but being able to read the memoirs of people who've lived it and can remember those things, as well as the fictional stories that bring it to, that living, breathing, imaginative life is definitely something that is going to continue to spread the legacy of those people that surely deserve the respect, the reverence, and the memory. So, Alison, tell us about yourself, my dear.
I'm like, I have to follow that. You moved me. I was like getting teary. I love that. I loved your story and how you started writing. I think that's amazing. But hi, everybody. My name's Alison Hammer. I'm so excited to be here. A little bit about me. I live in Chicago during the day. I work in advertising. I'm a creative director at an agency here in Chicago. My debut, I've got it here, You and Me and Us, came out 2 weeks into the pandemic, so April 2020. So not what I expected for the launch, but it's been an experience. And I am getting ready to launch my second pandemic book. Little Pieces of Me is coming out April 13th, so less than 2 weeks away. This one is the story of a woman who finds out through a DNA test that the dad she grew up with was not her biological father. So it's a story of family and identity and mother-daughter relationships and secrets and a lot of hopefully exciting stuff.
I was reading the synopsis for that one, and Annie McDonald and I have been talking about our ancestries, and I did one ancestry test and it was like totally vague, and it was just like super disappointing, but hers was like really great. And so now I've just ordered, Annie, I just ordered the right one. So now I'm going to go do it again. But finding that family history, and Annie was telling me about a brother of hers that was able to connect with some family, and you start finding family. But I have read stories like I found this person and I wasn't who I thought I was. And just to have that happen and to explore the relationships of, you see the discoveries, people make those discoveries, but what happens later? How do you deal with that information? How does that become part of your identity when you start to find things that you weren't sure about, and that your family is not who you thought they were? So what a fascinating topic for a book. And when I was reading that, I was like, oh my gosh, Annie and I were just talking about this. Oh, y'all, my shirt, if y'all are, I know people are squinting going, what is your, it says beignets and mimosas, because I just got back from New Orleans, and this is like this is life in New Orleans. You find the beignets and the mimosas. This is what we do. So that I could make every meal start with beignets and mimosas. So just I realized you could see the words and you're like, can't tell what it says. That's what it says. So all of these stories are really fascinating and very different, and yet you're all coming from a common place. And, and I know that it just, with other friends that I know who have a Jewish background, family is something that is super important. So many of the traditions are built around coming together as families, and lots of faiths have these family ties that bring everybody together, but it seems that it is something that is truly crucial to folks with a Jewish background. How does that sense of family play into your writing? And I know, Sylvie, you were telling your own story, and of course that's your family and their struggle. But do you find that it comes into your writing, that's sort of a focus based on just upbringing or traditions?
I don't really understand what the question that you have, but as far as family is concerned, my mother had a very, very large family, many brothers and sisters. I, on the other hand, was an only child. So the story really is so much more powerful because it talks about the relationship that she had with her brothers and sisters, and what she had to do to separate herself from them during the war, and how the war brings out these kinds of destruction of people being together. I wanted to make a comment before I forget. At my age, you forget a lot. So the comment is that just recently I had the privilege of actually doing a little Zoom with a classes, 8th grade classes. So there were 13 and 14-year-olds. I cannot tell you how excited I was, because it wasn't about getting the book into their hands, and it wasn't about, hey, you got book. It was all about please inspiring them. And oh, by the way, these kids were from various different countries. If not their generation, their parents. And I wanted to inspire them to write the story while they were young, while their brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and grandparents were alive. And that was so important. So just apropos of what you were just saying, how important it is to try to stimulate others to bring out that kind of story to the front.
So I wanted to answer your question, Nola, about family and Judaism, and I also wanted to. I think we talked about how my book overlapped with Sylvie's. I think there's a synergy between my book and Alison's book. The takeaway meant big. Well, you did it, so I'm doing. I brought it up. Do you have yours, Sylvie?
Yes. You give me a minute.
So mine it's about a family, and it's about a family mostly after the war, and they come to New York, and they've got lots of secrets and lies, and in fact the neighbors on the block in their own families have secrets. And Alison, I can't wait to read your book. I'm so interested in this DNA angle, because part of the issue in my story is there was no DNA testing back then. So people really couldn't test their own, find out their own roots in a scientific way. It was just if people were being honest with you, really. But in terms of Judaism and the family, although synagogue observance is certainly an important part of the religion, it's really a family-based religion, and the home is really considered a sanctuary. And there are many observances that take place in the home, just like we had just last weekend. We had the Passover Seder, and there's a whole ritual to it. And, I had a portion of my family, which was better than last year, where it was a completely Zoom Seder. But the home is a sanctuary, and family is very important. And the religion is really, if you take apart the different practices, so many of them have to do with family, keeping the family together, and observance in the home. For instance, we light candles on Friday night. That's in the home. So it's very intertwined.
I was thinking a similar thing, that with Judaism, it's a religion, but it's also a culture, and I think that a lot of that comes together. And I was thinking about Passover as well, is that there are some religious holidays where, yes, you go to temple, and there are different things you do, but there are several that involve participation in the home and with the family. So I think that it's just intrinsically part of, they just really do go together.
Mhm. Mhm.
I love that it translates to your writing as well. I feel like that having that strong sense of family around you seems to have pervaded your own writing. I mean, just in looking at yours, just the fact that it's either your own personal family story. And Sylvie, I do want you to tell folks just a little bit about your story without giving away the whole memoir. I want you to tease them into going to get the memoir, because just a little bit that I have read, it sounds like a fascinating story and an interesting angle on what people don't necessarily think of when they think of someone escaping the Holocaust. So I'm going to get back to that here in just a minute, because I know that it is your family's story. But it seems that those family relationships, whether they are tumultuous or whether they are binding or both, have really come into your own writing and how you're dealing with that sense of place, that sense of family, that sense of identity that seems to have been something that has been brought to you, like you said, culturally, Alison. I mean, it is a culture. You think about, so much of that faith is a daily walk, a daily life. It comes into every little element of it. Like you said, lighting candles on Friday. That was something I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know you did that. And I think that there's a lot of that maybe everybody doesn't know that are outside of Judaism. But it does seem that, when you get to know people who are of the Jewish faith, it is such a rich tapestry with so much history, but it does often seem to revolve so tightly around the family. And it's wonderful that it has made its way into your writing as well, that sense of family, whether it is family in conflict or, family that is finding out who it really is. And I think so much of our identity comes from our family and how we relate to them. And yet we're still trying to find our ways as individuals as well. And I know your first book, Alison, is definitely about kind of figuring out who you are on your own, not just necessarily who you are in relation to other people. And I like that premise as well. I know Alexis is trying to figure out who she is. Cece is trying to figure out who she is. And then, of course, they've got to figure out who they are together and what that relationship is. So is that something that you had personal experience with, or how did you find that particular storyline?
Yeah, and I think my mom is watching. So hi, Mom. When she realized, so my first book definitely has a mother and daughter who have a really difficult relationship. And my second book also has a mother-daughter really difficult relationship. And she's like, really? Like, come on. So everybody, we have a wonderful relationship. So we are not each other. We are not the characters. In some ways, I think I have parts of myself in both Alexis, the mom, and in Cece, the daughter. But really, it's interesting. When I started writing You and Me and Us, I thought it was the story of a man who had a terminal diagnosis and his last summer. And then some insightful readers were like, no, it's really the story about the mother and daughter and how they process everything and how their relationship evolves with each other and themselves. So it was accidental. And then I found out I did it the same exact thing in book 2, where I didn't realize until someone pointed out that at the heart of it, it really is about that mother and daughter. And I think I gravitate toward it. I think I'm probably comfortable doing it because I have a great relationship with my mom. So I'm comfortable looking at it from different angles. But I was just talking with a friend the other day that mothers and daughters have a relationship like no other, because you have so many similarities, but so many differences. Even if you're similar, the situations in which you grew up are different, or there are different factors that shape who you are. And so I think that there's a level of understanding like no other, and there's also a level of conflict like no other because it's safe. So there's a lot of just good stuff there. So to answer the question, it was a little bit by accident, but just a lot of good stuff to get into there.
Now, Sylvie, you left a country and moved out of it with your family. Now, did you have it was just your parents and you that were escaping at that time? Or did you have more of your family with you?
Oh, yes. My mother had a very big family, and some of her brothers did leave Belgium before the war, they were smart. There were 3 of them, and they kept begging the rest of the family. There were 7 brothers and 3 sisters there. And they were kept begging, listen, this is coming, pay attention, listen to what's going on out there. And, nobody really, they believed, but they didn't. And so we were caught. We were caught in the war when we could have definitely have not been caught. So we traveled as a caravan, with a family together, but it came a point where that was just not practical anymore. You cannot be escaping in cars and everything with a big family and crying children, and then the adults became a little bit angry. We should do this and we should do that, and so they had to split up. So we did, but we kept finding each other. We split up, and yet we would say, "Oh my gosh." My mother would find her sister right down the street all of a sudden. So they kept finding. There were 3 or 4 instances that happened where we. And I do not consider myself a Holocaust survivor, and even Meryl has questioned that. But I felt that we were so terribly blessed to be. We had ambassadors that. And sacrificed their lives to give us visas to leave Europe. So we were very grateful. But, my book it is really not about the Holocaust. There are a lot of books about the Holocaust. Unfortunately, lots of books about it. It's not about that. It's a very small portion at the beginning where I talk about the escape and what was going on in the war. What I wanted to do with the book is to talk a little bit about the long-term effects of an immigrant. I mean, everybody has a big heart for the refugee. Now especially, right? Now especially. Everybody. I mean, do they have food? Do they have shelter? Can I give them a coat? What can we do, to rescue them? And I compare that stage with Maslow's hierarchy of needs at the very bottom. That's that need to just eat, to drink, just to survive. But my book is really more about the struggle of an immigrant, a long-term immigrant who is not really comfortable, has a home, has a roof on the head, food and clothing and schooling. But there's that whole history of having gone through a war and feeling persecuted and always getting that feeling that, something could happen to you. So it has a little bit of a different, take on the whole idea of what it's like to be an immigrant from World War II. Yeah.
And I love that angle. I really do. I think that that's something people don't always think about, is that we talk about, those that ran from the advancing hordes that were coming, and they're the enemies that were coming to take them away. And so they escaped. And we're like, okay, great. End of story. They made it. Mm-hmm. And yet there is more to the story. And I love that you continued on really past that escape into what does that life look like going forward. Meryl, what were you going to say?
No, I wanted to say that that was exactly, from a fictional point of view, what I wanted to show. And I have no known connection to Holocaust relatives that I know of, but I have known survivors, interviewed them, and also been friends with children and grandchildren of survivors. And I thought, like Sylvie, this was a very important story to tell because, Holocaust novels are the #1 best-selling category of fiction on Amazon, but there are some, but there aren't a tremendous amount of post-Holocaust books. And this cloud of the Holocaust followed not only the parents, but the children to this country and to this day. I mean, some of my closest friends are children of Holocaust survivors and grandchildren, and they have groups and they discuss the impact. So I thought it was very important, like Sylvie, to tell that story.
The other thing that I wanted to point out is the stage at which the immigrant, comes to another country, that teenage, that adolescent stage. And it was very important for me to put that across, that that is such a vulnerable time, I mean, you're a teenager, you're 14 years old, you've got all kinds of feelings, and you look at a boy and, you want, who do you talk to? How do you communicate that, when you don't know the language?
Yeah.
So I wanted, that in itself is a plight that the teenager or the adolescent has to go through. And I wanted to point that out.
And the time that Alison is writing about with DNA testing and counseling and everything, they didn't have that way back then. Mm-hmm. So your characters have the benefit of modern science, right?
Yeah. And Nola, when you were talking about getting your DNA back, on Ancestry, they give you a little graphic, and I need to print it out and make it. But my graphic said Ashkenazi Jewish and Ashkenazi Jewish and Ashkenazi Jewish and Ashkenazi Jewish. So it was it was pretty funny. They didn't make it for people like me that were so in a box. But what I was going to say, Meryl, you talked about, I think it's so true that I'm personally fascinated with Holocaust literature, and I love that there are so many stories that new stories that are continued to be told. A friend of mine, Kristen Harmel, just her last 2 books had, I took Holocaust literature in college. I've read a lot of books, and her last 2 told stories that I had never heard of or thought of, even in countries outside of Germany and Poland. And there are so many stories to tell. What I think is interesting, because my book takes place in present day and then in 1974. And it's, when you talk about Jewish books, a lot of times it is about Holocaust, or it is about, big moments like that. And mine is just Jewish people being Jewish. And I think that I don't think I thought about it such a Jewish book until readers started responding and saying, I love the Jewish identity, or that's covered in the book. But it's who I am. And so I didn't really think that much about it. But it has Rosh Hashanah. It has a Shabbat service. It has, different elements to it that are just part of life. And Noah, like you said, you didn't know about Shabbat lighting candles. Something for me that I take for granted. So I think it's refreshing for people who are Jewish to see themselves in a modern, current story. And also for people who don't necessarily know that side of the culture, to just have it be a part of a person's identity and a part of their everyday life and who they are. So I love that you have the 3 of us on here, because I think it is such a balance of the role Judaism plays. And it's in all of them, but in different ways.
And what was so interesting to me was when I was writing the book, my first 2 books were ecumenical books. And I just said, all right, this is a Jewish book. And I wasn't really sure that people who weren't Jewish would go for it. And I'm so gratified that it has resonated with many people who aren't Jewish. And, just in the same way that I like books about Indian people from India or Korea or whatever. They enjoy learning about different cultures. So I think that's really a wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm. And that's something Annie and I were talking about today too. We were talking about the fact that books are a wonderful way for you to experience the world. Mm-hmm. And you can travel not only to different places, different times, immerse yourself in different cultures. There is so much that you can learn even in fiction, because it is based in some fact, whether it is historical fiction in a historical time period or something more modern. You're going to find yourself in a different place, maybe somewhere you've never gone before, because of the setting. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you, Alison. I think this is a great balance of people who have a similar background, but different stories to tell and different ways to approach it. And you really get to appreciate other cultures, other people, other ways of life that you wouldn't necessarily be exposed to otherwise. Mm-hmm. I'm not likely to be at someone's house for a Passover Seder. It's not likely that that's going to happen. I would be fascinated by the whole thing. But I have to tell you, as someone who's never done that before, I would also be extremely intimidated by that. And so if I had the opportunity to read a book like Alison's, where the traditions and those things are actually just Jewish people being Jewish, then by experiencing it through the fiction in a safe place, knowing that I can't say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, I'm not going to mess up this very important ceremony, then I can then appreciate it and feel more comfortable in that situation where I to be invited to something like that. And I can appreciate it more fully because I have some background knowledge in it, and I'm not sitting there absolutely terrified I'm going to screw it up.
So just so you know, if you get invited to a Seder, you should totally go. It's pretty much the Last Supper, and it is a dinner. You might have to try gefilte fish, but there's a lot of wine and just reading from a book. So literally, there's nothing to be afraid of. So if you get an invite, you should totally go.
And I wanted to add that a part of every Jewish holiday and Jewish tradition is hospitality, and welcoming people, welcoming the stranger, and especially Passover. We remind ourselves that we were slaves in Egypt, and that really colors our whole history and our observance. So you would be warmly welcomed. And if I had known, you could have Zoomed with us.
Oh, I would love to do that. And it's one of the things that as a writer, as a researcher, as a teacher, I have so much appreciation for different cultures. I teach children from all different backgrounds. And it's fascinating when they share those little bits with me. When I have a student who has brought me something special for the Chinese New Year, and it was unexpected. I didn't really know what the tradition was, and she brings me a card with some yen in it. And I was like, what is this? And I kept them. I still have them. And all of these little traditions. I have students from India who have brought me things for their holidays, and that sense of inclusion, just knowing that they felt comfortable enough with me to know that I was curious about their traditions and allowed them to be comfortable with those traditions. That to me is something that I think we all can reach even more deeply to do, is to be in somebody who is actually going to embrace all of those things and learn from them. There is something beautiful about the traditions that people bring with them from their homes, their past, their family's past. And it means so much to the individual. And if that individual means so much to you, then why not, share and learn about those things that make them so much of who they are. And I think that's really one of the great things about what you all are sharing in your writing. Is it is who you are, whether it is, a personal story that you've lived out, or just your own traditions that you've brought into your story, Alison, and the everyday, and Meryl, just that sense of people who don't necessarily know who they are, because for so long, especially during the Holocaust and up to the Holocaust, they had to pretend to be people they weren't, or try to hide who they were. And perhaps that web of stories that were originally spun for protection have had to become truth. And maybe they're not as true as they seem, but who are these people really? But the reasons why they do things are very interesting to explore as well, because it had everything to do with their history, their culture, and how others perceived them because of those things. There's so much to learn from the past and what we can actually take into the present, and having an understanding of these things that have shaped so much of our history as a world, not just a nation, especially. And that's something that I think we can definitely explore even more deeply. But I love the various aspects of this particular story and this particular culture and faith that we're able to explore between the three of you, because it is truly fascinating.
There was a time, actually, the time when Meryl has her novel is based around in the early 50s, and bless you, somebody sneezed. That it was not easy to be that foreign person. In fact, you felt ashamed. You didn't want people to know. They weren't talking about the war too much, which is what Meryl capitalized in her book, how they were, they wouldn't talk about it. They, hush, hush. But, and that was very difficult because you felt like you couldn't be yourself. You couldn't, and certainly not any kind of sympathy, that's for sure. So you felt very much alone and apart from the country that you were coming to. Things have changed a lot, and the whole picture of foreigners and refugees and people who gone through a war has united people in many different ways. And today it is easier to be such a person because you get people to help you. I know my synagogue was sponsoring with Hayas, which is an agency that helps refugees, and we sponsored families, and we helped them out a lot, one-to-one, the families, because nowadays that's not only acceptable, but what is out there, it's okay to be a foreigner these days, but not then.
Well, I don't know. I wanted to raise the question then, and I think it's just as current now. How do we treat people who are different than we are? And I think that is something that we still grapple with. And what's our responsibility to our fellow human beings? And what do we do when we see evil in the world? Do we watch? Do we look the other way? Do we speak out? Do we try to stop it? And I think that these are really timeless questions, but they're also timely questions.
Very much.
And I think two people, as somebody who is not Jewish, I worry, will my curiosity about your history and your traditions, how does that curiosity come off to people of the Jewish faith? Is my curiosity about your traditions intrusive? Is it welcome? Is it going to be perceived as something that's, you worry about seeming like you're isolating people and saying, I'm curious about your Jewish heritage, and worrying, does that person think that I see them only as a Jewish person, that I don't see them as a whole person, because now I'm curious about this aspect of them. And I think we worry about that with people of various faiths, various cultures, various backgrounds, immigrants coming in. We want to be curious and learn. But I think so often we hit a speed bump when we want to ask those questions because we worry about how those questions are perceived. And, we worry if that person is going to think, what are they going to do with this little bit of knowledge that they have? Is that going to, spin up a stereotype? How are they going to use this? So sometimes the curiosity is actually a hard thing to put into words and to continue to ask about. As much as we want to have that dialogue, we worry, looking on from the outside looking in. I know we had a very similar conversation when we did our Black History Month show, and we had some wonderful women on that show. And I did get the opportunity to ask them about some things that, are those sensitive subjects that you sometimes are afraid to ask. You want to put that curiosity out there, those questions out there. How do you feel about these certain things? But at the same time, you wonder if being on the outside of that, being a white female, being a non-Jewish person, is that something that the question itself could be found offensive? And we worry about that.
I think that there are offensive ways to ask a question, and there are genuine, curious ways to ask. And for me, it's a part of me that I don't get to talk about a lot. So I would welcome the conversation. And I think in particular, Judaism values education so much and curiosity so much and encourages asking questions. And it's also a big storytelling culture. And so granted, when you any question that you ask, you're probably going to get a story back. That it's that
would be great. I would love that.
Very much open to opinion and conversation. And I personally wouldn't be offended at all, and I would welcome a conversation like that with someone.
But I think you're talking exactly what I was referring before, that in many years ago, in the 50s, that's exactly what was happening. Nobody was asking questions. Either they didn't know to ask the questions, or they didn't care, or they were afraid. And so nobody talked about it. If you had an accent, they didn't even ask you where you were coming from. It was very difficult for them, I'm sure, as well as for the person to come in. But, like Alison says, that in French, you say la chanson fait la musique. That, if anybody gets it, is the music, the tune makes the music. So it's how you ask.
Beautiful.
How you open up, and how your face looks in the smile, that you're inviting and want it to have information. Tell me more about, what does it mean? What do you do when you light the candles on the Sabbath? What is it for? That is a mannerism that nowadays people do have. But in those days, when I first came to this country, and when Meryl wrote the book of that time, it was not happening.
I also think there's so many similarities between us that when you learn more, you'll realize it's not so different. And I think that knowledge can do that. And I think that not knowing makes it feel scarier and more different. But once you know that Passover and the Seder is really a dinner party, drinking wine and reading a book together, it's not so scary anymore. So I think that and I know, right? Who couldn't?
I totally do that.
And I think that conversation and knowledge and learning more about what makes us different, and we can find similarities. So, I personally think it's great.
I agree.
Well, speaking of stories and storytelling cultures, Meryl, I'm going to let you say whatever you were going to say, and then I'm going to tell a story from my culture. What were you going to say, Meryl?
No, I was just going to say that I have there's a little part in the book where Branka goes to synagogue on Yom Kippur, and on that day there's public confession. That's how Jews confess, once a year publicly, and she compares that to her best friend who goes once a week to confess to the priest. So it's a little different, but it's very similar.
Absolutely. All right. We have got some great comments that have been coming in. Annie's been chatting with some folks here too. We've got lots of friends who have popped in. Grace Salmon is here. Robert Waltney is here.
Meryl,
lots of fun people. These fun people. So we are so glad we've got so many folks hanging out. I am going to tell you a story from my background. Of course, I love to tell stories about South Louisiana. And you want to talk about things that get misunderstood and that there needs to be a little bit more information about and storytelling about. And it is the legends and the faith of folks in South Louisiana. I know Meryl and I were talking about voodoo earlier. We were talking about the fact that voodoo was actually originally a practice of healing and protection. And yet, just due to misinformation and not having conversations, it has been turned into something that it's not, something that is frightening and foreign, when in fact, most New Orleans voodoo practice has a very strong parallel to Roman Catholicism. So not as foreign as people think, and certainly not as frightening. But we're going to talk about something that might be a little unnerving, because we like to talk about the mystery and history of things around New Orleans. And today's ghost story revolves around Homus House. Homus House is located in Darrow, Louisiana. Homus House is a magnificent Greek Revival mansion in plantation country between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Between Baton Rouge and New Orleans along the Mississippi River is just one plantation after another. And there are some beautiful homes that are still standing there. And Homus gets its name from the Homus Native Americans that once called the Fertile Bend in the Mississippi River home. And in fact, there is Darrow, Louisiana is there where Homus House is, but there actually is a Homus, Louisiana. So it also has, the Native Americans have given their name to a town there as well. So Homus House is an opulent home with its wraparound galleries and expansive spiral staircase. I love this image of the staircase looking up. It goes up 2 stories of that tight spiral there. And it has had several owners during its time as the largest sugarcane plantation, one of the largest sugarcane plantations. And at one time, it was about 300,000 acres. It was massive, massive plantation. Lavish entertaining was expected by guests at Homa's, no matter who the owner was. The home with its spectacular ornamental gardens also included a prolific farm with vegetables, livestock, and rich hunting and fishing. One of Homa's house's most famous owners was Irishman John Burnside, who amassed huge properties along the river despite being a penniless immigrant when he arrived in America. He started in Boston, worked his way down to New Orleans, and eventually paid $1 million in today's money for the home and property itself, and then continued to buy a property around it. And there is actually a town in Louisiana named for John Burnside. So Burnside, Louisiana, there's also a Burnside plantation home as well. So he, however, is not one of the owners around which our ghost stories focus, although he did contribute mightily to that area of the state. So, like many antebellum homes, it has gone through periods of neglect and restoration. During one of these restorations, workers removing the 150-year-old flooring encountered what they called la petite fille, or the little girl. She was incredibly lifelike in her blue dress with dark hair and dark eyes. Rather than being a nasty presence, she seemed curious and playful, as one would expect a child of between 7 and 10 years old to be. They didn't know exactly how old she was, but the workers figured she was about that age and seemed to be curious about what they were doing. She hung out with them quite a bit, it seemed. See, the little girl is happy about the attention being paid to her home with renovations, guests, and tours now. She makes many appearances, usually in the mornings or late afternoons, coming down that spiral staircase we saw a minute ago, or skipping along an upstairs hallway, or even tagging along behind the tour groups. So, who is she? That's the question, isn't it? Researchers have narrowed her down to one of two little girls. First is the daughter of Colonel John Preston and his wife, Caroline, whose father actually built the manor house. When their young daughter died, likely from yellow fever, the loss crushed them. It is said that they left the house never to return, and perhaps the little girl is their child looking for her parents who left Homa's house. Or another possibility is the daughter of Colonel William and Harriet Miles, who died at 7 years old in the year 1900. The child was buried in the family cemetery near the Mississippi River. Many cemeteries were off of the plantation property. They were somewhere else. And when the levee broke in 1927, the headstones, including the one where the child was buried, were washed away and graves were covered in tons, literal tons of river silt. Then the new levee was built over the site, further desecrating the graveyard. Any major disturbance to a grave can release spirits who are searching for help in restoring their place of eternal rest. So the little girl is one of those two children, most likely, but whoever she is, La Petite Fille, lends her lively spirit to the crown jewel of the River Road plantations and is welcomed by both staff and visitors alike, because she has such a sweet little playful spirit. So some ghosts haunt with the creepies, but this little girl just seems to be enjoying her time in one of the most beautiful places on the Mississippi River. So she's having herself some fun there. So La Petite Fille, we don't know her name, so we don't know what to call her, but she continues on with the name that the workers gave her when they were restoring the flooring. So that is our story of the crown jewel of the Mississippi River, Homa's House Plantation. So now your lagniappe question. Lagniappe is the Louisiana word for a little something extra. So much like the extra donut in a baker's dozen, we're going to talk about this kind of just a random little extra question for you. So because we were talking about Jewish traditions, what Jewish tradition is either your favorite or do you wish more people actually knew about? So feel free to chime in. Your favorite or one that you wish more people actually knew about?
I'll go. Since we're on Passover, we've been talking about it. One of my favorites is a breakfast dish called matzah brai. And basically, I mean, it's so good. I have it, like, I try to eat it just on Passover, but I made it on Sunday morning. It is pretty much like Jewish French toast. You soak the matzah in water to get it soft, and then mix it with eggs and scramble it together. I use syrup on it, but I was talking to a friend who uses sour cream on it.
Sour cream.
I do the syrup for sweet, but it is like one of my favorite things in the world, and I tried only to eat it on Passover.
So wait, the masa they're the big square wafers, right?
Yeah.
So you soak them, or do you crush them up first?
I fold them in in fourths, and then I soak them in hot water just till they get like a little bit mushy, and then scramble eggs, mix it together, and like cook it like you would have eggs. But it tastes like, I mean, it's kind of like French toast, but in a scrambled form.
Oh, so it's not like making like a potato pancake where you like mix it up and then you like sear it.
Yeah, I mean, some people
you're actually scrambling.
Some people take the matzah and fry it. It's also called fried matzah. I know some people who literally like take the sheets and fry them, deep fry them. But I love the scrambled egg version. It's really good.
Oh.
I would like to just share a holiday that I think not that many people know about, and it's called Sukkot, and it takes place in the fall. And during that time, observant Jews build little huts in their backyards, and three-sided. So one is always open for the elements, and they take their meals, all their meals there. And the purpose of this is to, of course, remembering, when we were wandering in the desert for 40 years, but it's also to, symbolize the fragility of life, and the vastness of the universe, and our place in it. And also hospitality is an important part of that tradition, and you are to invite people to eat with you in your sukkah. So I don't know if you've ever seen a sukkah.
No.
It can be beautiful.
Now I'm curious. Have you made one? Have you built one?
Yeah, we do. My husband wanted to do one. I don't know, from way back when we first moved into a house and had a deck. So he kind of made his own, but that blew away. So we got a prefabricated one, and unfortunately, we did not put it up during the pandemic. It was the first, because we couldn't have company. But we do that, and we invite people to eat, and it's really nice for kids. It's sort of the kids come and decorate it, so they don't have a Christmas tree. They can decorate the sukkah.
Yeah.
What about you, Sylvie?
Well, I tell you, and I don't even can call it the favorite holiday, because it's not a good way to phrase it, but the day of the year that means or resonates mostly with me is the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. And I just love that day. I wear all white. Now, there are different reasons for that, I think, but I think it's a way of looking at a shroud. That's the day that the old self dies, and the rebirth of yourself as hopefully a better person. It's a very emotional day for me, and I really look forward to it. Maybe because I have a lot to repent about, I don't know. But it's a day that really means a great deal to me. And if I had to give up any other, I don't want to say holiday, but what do we call it? We call it festivities, I think. We don't call it a holiday when we have, Hanukkah and Pesach. It's not really a holiday. It's what do we call it?
Well, I call it a holiday, but I would call Yom Kippur a holy day.
Yeah. So that's to me the day that I look forward to for the whole year.
Those are all wonderful and very interesting. I love this. This is what this show is all about. It's learning these new things, and all of those things are really, really beautiful traditions. Even scrambling matzo bread. I love that.
I might as well make that for dinner actually now.
Now it's on your mind. Now you gotta have it, right?
Do I have time for my matzo brie story?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mentioned that I had different incarnations and that I wrote a cooking column for years called The Kosher Gourmet. And 1 year I was invited, believe it or not, to make something for Passover on the Regis Philbin show.
Ooh.
And I was going to make a dessert, a Passover dessert, and I was going to bring my Seder plate and talk about the meaning of Passover and everything. And then the day before, the producer went on vacation, and the associate producer called me up and said, "We don't want you to do that. We took a vote, and we want you Jewish, non-Jewish, Black, white, Asian, everybody wants you to make matzo brie." And I said, "The matzo brie has 2 ingredients or 3 ingredients. How can I make a matzo brie until that's what you're making? That's what you're making." So I went and I made it. And Regis Philbin, he was a very funny man. So he thought it would be hysterical if he gagged on my matzo brie.
Wow.
And he gagged on it, but there was a joke. Then he said he was only kidding, but I didn't think it was that funny.
I don't
really
think
can't mess up matzo brie, right, Alison?
no, can't mess with matzo brie.
Well, now someone's going to have to make me some matzo brie because I'm not sure I would make it right. But it sounds delicious. Now, Meryl and Sylvie, you both said that you do it with sour cream.
I like it with sour cream, but yeah, Alison said this syrup. I just, in fact, I made it for myself yesterday because I don't know, I love it with the sour cream.
So, but I also with potato pancakes with latkes, I'm in the applesauce camp for that. So I think I gravitate toward like the salty.
I'm applesauce for that.
I like the salty and sweet combination.
Yeah.
And I'm a salt person. I like to do it. To me, it's like a nice scrambled egg. And my husband, he puts the jam on it, and I put the salt.
Oh, I got salt in mine.
I think that has a lot to do with a heritage of whether our ancestors were Russian, or whether they were from Poland. Okay, so if for instance with a gefilte fish, if you tasted the gefilte fish and it's sweet, then you pretty much know the family came from Poland. But if it's salty, you pretty much know the family came from Russia. So it's a cultural. Thing as well.
And my grandparents had a mixed marriage because they were.
So Nola, have you ever had gefilte fish?
No, I have had latkes, but I've never had gefilte fish.
So gefilte fish is a divisive thing in the different Jewish families. My mom is a retired teacher, and she had a student who said it was a science experiment gone wrong. But
I've seen it in the store in like a jar or something.
I don't. Yeah, I do like it when somebody puts it on a plate for me. I struggle a little bit with a jar. As long as someone else takes it out of the jar for me, it's delicious.
I can see the science experience.
A little horseradish, yeah.
Oh, now horseradish can cover a variety.
And that's what it does.
You can put enough horseradish on things, you can probably get anything down. It's kind of like Louisiana food. Don't ask what's in it, just cover it in hot sauce and eat it. Just never ask the ingredients. You don't want to know. Like boudin, don't ask, just eat.
No.
Well, you ladies have been amazing, and we have spent such a delightful evening learning. I hope to learn even more about your wonderful, rich, and vibrant culture and faith, and just through your writing, through your storytelling, this has truly been an honor and a joy to get to spend this evening with all of you. And I want everyone, I know you guys got to show your books, but I do want everyone to see the beautiful covers of the book. And I didn't put the new one up, Alison, because this is the one they can go buy right now. So I want them to go buy this book. So go get these and just really, really soak in what these wonderful women have poured into their books with the family, the faith, and the stories that are just woven so beautifully in their writing. So please, please, please go get these books. As I always say, read the reviews, read the summaries on Amazon, and if you can, go support your local bookstores and order them online from them. And of course, leave your reviews then on Amazon and Goodreads. Please leave your reviews. Reviews make the author world go round. And so we do need those. And speaking of my books, just a little bit there with the voodoo, we're going to, as we usually end the show, because Annie always says that I need to promote my own books as well. I am an author, I'm here. So we're going to watch the trailer for Crescent City Moon. There's Crescent City Moon for all of you. All right, those of you who are joining us, thank you so much for tuning in on all of the locations where we're broadcasting live. We do appreciate you spending your evening with us. It has been an exciting evening. Annie and I started earlier this afternoon. We've been leapfrogging our way through the Right Review with some wonderful shows. So please catch up on those if you have not had a chance to see them. If you did not get to see this show from its start, from the very beginning, or if you're new to the second line and you haven't had a chance to see the past episodes, this is episode 26 of the Second Line Show, and we've done some special events along the way as well. They are all living over on YouTube. Go to Nola Nash Entertainment and you can check out episodes 1 through 26 along with all of the special events. So check those out and get to know some fabulous authors, just like we've had the chance to do tonight. So thank you, ladies, so much for joining us. It has truly been a pleasure and a privilege to spend some time with you all this evening. So thank you very much. Thank you all for watching out there, and have a wonderful Wednesday night.
Thank you.